Hi Room 29 friends. Today for our math lesson, we are going to focus on the lesson 7-1 from our Everyday Math series. The topic for today's lesson is converting liquid measures. We're going to be focusing on the U.S. customary units. By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to convert between cups, pints, quarts, and gallons. If you do not already have your math journal, a pencil, and some type of paper to work out problems on, get those items ready now. Let's start with some mental math. You can simply write the answers to these questions on your paper and then we'll check them together. The first problem is 3/10 plus 3/10. In your notebook, you should have written that 3/10 plus 3/10 equals 6/10. Let's do another easy one. How about 8/10 plus 1/10? You can simply add the two numerators because the denominators are already the same. In your notebook, you should have said that 8/10 plus 1/10 equals 9/10. Now we're going to move on to a couple that are a little bit harder. This next one is 5/10 plus 34/100. This problem is harder because the denominators do not match. So before you can answer this problem, you need to make sure that the denominators are the same. An easy way to do that on your paper is to start with the first fraction, 5/10, then multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number in order to get a new denominator that is 100. Think to yourself, 10 times what equals 100? And you should already know that 10 times 10 equals 100. If we multiply the denominators by 10, we have to do the same for the numerators. And we know that 5 times 10 is 50. So now we have an equivalent fraction for 5/10, where the denominator is 100. Now we can take that 50/100 and add on the 34/100. If you haven't already done that, do it now, and I will show the answer in just a minute. When you worked out 50/100 plus 34/100, you should have said the answer is 84/100. All right, I'm going to give you another problem, very similar to the previous one, but I'm not going to do the work for you. You need on your paper, or in your head, if you can do it in your head, make the denominators match, and then add the numerators for 9/10 plus 2/100. If you need to pause the video now to give yourself plenty of time to think and work it out, feel free to do so. When adding 9/10 plus 2/100, your answer should have been 92/100. If you got that correct all on your own, pat yourself on your back. Now we're going to move on to the math message part of the lesson. For today's math message, you need to turn to your journal, page 228. You need to complete just the top section that looks like my screen. As you're working, think, how can the picture on the right, the big G there, how can that help you remember how many cups are in a pint, how many pints are in a quart, and how many quarts are in a gallon? That big G represents gallons, the Q's represent quarts, the P's represent pints, and the C's represent cups. Use that drawing to help you fill in the 4 blanks. If you need to pause your video now, do so and then turn it back on once you get the 4 blanks filled out. All right, let's check our answers for the math message. For 1 pint, you should have said it equals 2 cups because 1 P has 2 little C's that represent cups inside of it. 1 quart equals 2 pints because inside each big Q, you have 2 P's that represent pints. The next one says 1/2 gallon equals blank quarts. Well, the big G represents a whole gallon. So a half gallon, you could just divide that gallon in half. So in half of that G, how many quarts do you have? Or how many Q's do you have? And you should have said 2. Then in a whole gallon, the entire G, how many quarts or Q's do you see? You should have said 4. So the question on this slide says, what does the diagram next to the math message problem represent? I'm sure you already figured out the big G represents 1 gallon. The Q's inside the G represent the 4 quarts that fit inside of a gallon. The P's inside of the Q's represent the number of pints that fit inside of a quart. And the C's inside the P's represent the number of cups that you can fit into 1 pint. What you need to remember is cups, pints, quarts, and gallons are all units that we use to measure liquid amounts in the U.S. customary system. In Unit 6, we worked with metric units for measuring liquid amounts. Those units were milliliters and liters. Here's a cute little drawing of Mr. Gallon, sometimes known as Gallon Man. And this is just another way to represent that big capital G from your math journal, page 228. Mr. Gallon is there in the middle, and this shows that within 1 gallon, you can get 4 quarts. And within those quarts, you get 2 pints. So that means there are 2 pints in 1 quart. And then 2 cups in 1 pint. This is just a very similar representation of that same drawing from the top of page 228. Today we're going to be solving some number stories involving the U.S. customary units of capacity. Before we get started solving some problems, let's look at the diagram on Math Journal page 228 and then the measurement scales on the top of page 229. How are these two alike? Look at the G, look at the scales. How are they alike? And how are they different? Well, I know they're alike because they both show the relationship between the units. It shows you how many of one unit is equal to how many of another unit. For example, when looking at quarts and pints, I can look here and see, 3 quarts is equal to 6 pints, or 5 quarts is equal to 10 pints. Very similar to the information in the G diagram. Now, these two representations are different because one is an actual scale. The one on the left is what they call a measurement scale. The one on the right is the measurement scale. The drawing on the left is just a diagram or a drawing. That's what makes them different. They still give you very similar information. Now let's look at Math Journal page 228. This is right underneath the math message. We're going to complete 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. We're going to do 1A together. I'm going to give you a little bit of help on 1B. Then you're going to finish it, 1C, and 1D on your own. For 1A, we are focusing just on pints and cups. So you could look at the chart or the scale at the top of page 229, and the very bottom scale is all about pints equivalent to cups. It says on here, 1 pint is blank cups. Well, you know by looking at the scale, 1 pint is 2 cups. And 2 pints are equivalent to 4 cups. 3 pints are equivalent to 6 cups. And 5 pints is equivalent to 10 cups. And then they do it kind of backwards for the very last row. How many pints are equal to 16 cups? Well, I don't know that just by looking at the scale or looking at the G chart, but I do know that if I take my number of pints and multiply it by 2, I get the equal number of cups. So 2 pints times 2 equals 4 cups, or 3 pints times 2 equals 6 cups, or 5 pints times 2 cups in every pint equal 10 cups. So then you can think to yourself, what number times 2 equals 16? And you should know that 8 times 2 equals 16. So 8 pints is equivalent to 16 cups. Let's work on part B together. This time we're focusing just on quarts and pints. So you can look at the big Q's on the G chart, or you can go to the middle scale, the second one on the top of page 229 that focuses on quarts and pints. According to that scale, 1 quart is equal to 2 pints, and 2 quarts is equal to 4 pints. Make sure you're filling these tables in your math journal as I do them. 3 quarts is equal to 6 pints. And now we have another one where they give us the pints and not the quarts. This is where I would try to figure out the rule. How am I going from quarts to pints? And it's very much like part A. We're taking the number of quarts times 2 to get the equivalent number of pints. So 2 quarts times 2 pints in every quart is a total of 4 pints. And 3 quarts times 2 pints in every quart is a total of 6 pints. Then you have to think to yourself, what number times 2 equals 14? I would like you to finish part B now. So pause your video, finish part 1B, then turn your video back on once you have part B completed. All right, let's check our answers for part B. You should have said that 7 quarts are equivalent to 14 pints, and 9 quarts are equivalent to 18 pints, and 13 quarts is equivalent to 26 pints. Make sure you have all of these numbers filled in on number 1A and number 1B. I'm going to ask you now to complete part C and part D all on your own. Remember, you can use the G chart. You can use the scale at the top of page 29. You can also find a rule and use it to go from one unit to the next, like I did when I showed that you multiplied by 2's in table A and table B. Okay, so pause your video now. Once you have part C and part D all filled out, turn your video back on to check your work. All right, friends, let's check part C and D. When converting gallons to quarts, you should have realized that 1 gallon is equivalent to 4 quarts. That means 2 gallons is equivalent to 8 quarts. And 3 gallons is equivalent to 12 quarts. If you didn't already notice, the rule for converting from gallons to quarts is multiply by 4. For the next row, they gave you 36 quarts. So since you know the rule is to multiply by 4, you could think to yourself, what times 4 is 36? And if you know your multiplication facts, you should know that 9 times 4 equals 36. Then for part C, that one's a hard one. You have to multiply 15 times 4. I don't know if I could do that one in my head. That's one I would work out probably in the margins of page 228 or on my scrap paper. After working it out, I would know that 15 times 4 equals 60, or 15 gallons is equivalent to 60 quarts. For part D, you are converting from quarts to cups. You should have known that 1 quart is equivalent to 4 cups. 3 quarts is equivalent to 12 cups. And 5 quarts is equivalent to 20 cups. 6 quarts is equivalent to 24 cups. If you didn't already figure it out, the rule for converting from quarts to cups is take your number of quarts times 4 to give you the equivalent number of cups. So for the last row, you can think to yourself, what times 4 equals 40? And you would have probably gotten 10, because 10 times 4 equals 40. Make sure you have all of these tables filled out in your math journal, page 228. All right, now we're going to go to the story problems at the bottom of page 228. We're going to do these two together, and then you will do some on your own on page 229. The first problem says, Tricia has a container with a capacity larger than 2 cups, but smaller than 1 gallon. Which of these could be the container's capacity? A cup, a pint, a quart, or a gallon? Well, let's talk about some of the specifics of this story problem. It says Tricia has a container with a capacity larger than 2 cups, but smaller than 1 gallon. Capacity just means how much it can hold. So she has like a mystery container, but we don't know how big it is. We don't know its capacity or how much it can hold. But they're giving us clues. This mystery container is larger or can hold more than 2 cups. But it's smaller than 1 gallon, so it holds less than 1 gallon of liquid. Which of these could be the container's capacity? So let's think about that. If we're talking about it has to be larger than 2 cups, that means it cannot be 1 cup, because 1 cup is not larger than 2 cups. And then a pint. Let's think about what a pint actually is. If you look at the P down here at the bottom, a P or pint is the same as 2 cups. But in the first sentence, it says the capacity is larger than 2 cups. So the capacity of this mystery container cannot be a pint because a pint is exactly 2 cups, not larger than 2 cups. Then our next option is a quart. So think about the big Q. Is the big Q larger than 2 cups? Yep, a quart looks like it can hold 4 cups. Is a quart smaller than 1 gallon? it definitely is, because it takes 4 quarts to equal a gallon. So could the container's capacity be 1 quart? Yes, it could, because 1 quart is larger than 2 cups, but smaller than 1 gallon. Then the last option is a gallon. That one can't be the answer because the problem says it has to be smaller than a gallon. This mystery container is smaller or less than a gallon, so a gallon container will not work. The quart container is the correct answer. Problem number 3 says, Sue and her sister Cindy have a lemonade stand. They want to make 8 gallons of lemonade. They only have 1 quart containers. How many 1 quart containers will they need to hold 8 gallons of lemonade? The answer is blank 1 quart containers. So let's think about using cubes on this problem. They want to make, I'm going to change my pen color. They want to make 8 gallons of lemonade. But they only have 1 quart containers. So if they only have 1 quart containers, how many 1 quart containers will they need to hold 8 gallons of lemonade? We're talking about 1 quart containers, but need a total of 8 gallons of lemonade. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about this. You can pause your video now so that you can think and look at the diagram and try and work it out. And then turn your video back on once you think you have the answer. All right, let me tell you how I was thinking or how I started working this out. I don't know how many quarts are in 8 gallons, but I can use the diagram at the top of page 228 to tell me how many quarts are in 1 gallon. So I'm going to make a note to myself. I'm going to say 1 gallon, I'm just going to abbreviate, equals, how many quarts? Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 gallon equals 4 quarts. Now I need to figure out how many quarts are in 8 gallons. So if 1 gallon equals 4 quarts, that tells me I can take my number of gallons, 8, and multiply it by 4, because every gallon has 4 quarts. And you know that 8 times 4 equals 32. So if they only have 1 quart containers and they need a total of 8 gallons of lemonade, they're going to need 32 1 quart containers. Make sure that you have used cubes on problem number 3 and you've written the answer on the answer line. Now we're going to move on to page 229 in our math journal. You are going to answer problems 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 on your own. Once you have those answered, then you're going to be putting those answers into the Google form. I will have the same exact questions copied from page 229, and you can just put your answers in. That'll show me that you understood the problems. And I'm going to tell you, some of them are kind of tricky, so make sure you're being careful. Pause your screen now so that you can work on problems 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 all by yourself. If you're having trouble with some of them, you may want to ask an adult or an older sibling to help you or check your work.